Welcome, students, to the second week of Intro to American Government. Again, I'm Professor Callahan. This week, we're going to be going over um, what I call a micro lecture, which is a lecture within like 10 minutes. And so the micro lecture we will be talking about, we'll be talking about the we'll be talking about the road to revolution, why we end up having a revolution to begin with, um, how how it has affected our how it really has affected just where we're at today as an American society, right? And so the we're gonna as we go through this, we're gonna talk about some things that happened then and how it correlates with us today in 2025. Okay, so I want to just get ready to start this lecture, and hopefully you will be taking some notes on Chapter 2, the Constitution, Rights and Race Intertwined. Again, it's the American Government in Black and White, Diversity and Democracy. This book is a sixth edition. You're welcome to use the third, fourth, fifth, or sixth edition. And I don't want you to use anything older. So please be mindful of that. A revolution for independence, the road to revolution began because in 1739 and to about 1763, Great Britain was engaged in a variety of costly wars, the 7 Years' War, the American Indian War, which were really the same war. It was just fought on different continents, which is really the First World War. And so, because the Britain was having a revenue problem, Parliament decided to, hey, well, we have that, over the New World, we have colonies, and so the colonies, we should have the colonies pay for some of this, some of uh, the cost of these wars, paying the soldiers who are fighting these wars, who are really dying for the crown, right? And so it starts with this idea of the American Revenue Act, which was called the Sugar Act. What the Revenue Act did was it revised duties, which is taxes on sugar, coffee, tea, wine, no, not wine, and other imports. What this did was it caused the colonies to protest in several of the assemblies because the colonies did have governments that were subservient to the crown and to parliament, and so they were upset and protested the taxation for revenue. Um, about a year later, almost a year, right? The Stamp Act was put into place. The Stamp Act, the thing with the Stamp Act, it was repealed almost a year later. But what it did was for the year that these people were being taxed, anything that was printed had to have a stamp. And so therefore you have a notary, we know those people. They you had to pay to have anything printed. And so if you had a marriage license, newspaper, deeds to property, whatever it was, you had to have it stamped. And we do that today with notaries. We pay them $15 for the first page, and then $10 subsequently for any other page after that. What this did was cause riots in cities. Collectors were forced to resign. Uh, it was so much upheaval, right? And so then what ends up happening was because they're upset now. They're saying, "How are you taxing us without representation? We feel like this is a violation of our rights as the subjects of the king, who is thousands of miles across the ocean." Well, the parliament says, "Well, we're going to do another one. We're going to do a quartering act, which requires colonists to house British troops and supply them with other goods like candles, firewood, food." This ended up causing more protests in the assemblies. New York Assembly was punished for failure to comply, which then in 1766, the Declaratory Act goes into place, which declares Parliament is supreme over the colonies. In all cases whatsoever, you do not supersede the Parliament. Uh, what it did do was it caused a celebration because again, they end up repealing the Stamp Act. So because of these protests, but then what ends up happening was the Townshend Act's going to pay place, which imposes new duties on glass, lead, paper, paint, tea. Uh, Again, people are upset, but this time newspapers start attacking the British uh, policy. So not only institutions such as the colonial governments, but now you have what we call the fourth estate, which is media. They decide to get involved and say, well, hey, this is not fair, which leads to a protest, which we call the Boston Massacre, right? And so the Boston Massacre takes place on March 5th in 1770, where British soldiers killed five colonists, the first being Crispus Attucks, a former slave merchant seaman who was the first person killed by British soldiers. The thing is, those British soldiers were tried in court. They were defended by John Adams, who was a lawyer. And also, if you don't know who John Adams is, he becomes the second president of the United States. And so John Adams also uh, uh, uses a tactic that we see a lot of times. We saw throughout history, especially when it comes to Black men. What he did was, and I'm quoting him when he described Crispus Attucks to the jury. He said, Attucks was a stout mulatto fellow whose very looks was enough to terrify any person. You know, that idea that Black men are menacing. What the soldiers got off, and this idea perpetuating the aggressiveness, the anger, the menacing looks of Black men. Then you would go on to have the Tea Act that would come 1773, which really gave a monopoly to the East India Company on tea in the colonies. And that was a big thing. And some of it, which you'll see uh, with a lot of these acts, what you'll see when you look at the Constitution is you'll see a pushback, like quartering. We have a thing with monopolies in America where the government is not in favor of corporations having complete control. You're seeing this with Google today, because whenever you say search engine, what do we all say? Google it. I mean, you don't say go to Yahoo, you don't say go to a search engine, you say Google it. And Google, they say, does have a monopoly. And so monopolies are not something we like or we care about. Because of the protests, you have the Chorus of Acts, which happened between March to June 1774. And and what that does is the British, because of the protests and the pushback, uh, you will have in 1776, you'll have the Sons of Liberty board ships in Boston Harbor and throw 3 crates of tea overboard. And understand what that does. This is destruction of property. This is the thing that we get upset when groups today, may it be Black Lives Matter, Antifa, the Proud Boys, the 3%ers, regardless of what they're protesting, if they start destroying properties, may it be a church, what the Proud Boys did, or CVS, which was Antifa, regardless of what it is, we tend to clutch our pearls and say that's a bad thing. But where do these groups learn this from? Well, we learned it on December 16, 1776, when the Sons of Liberty boarded ships in Boston Harbor and they threw crates over. And the British response to that was in between March and June of 1774, you end up having Britain do a blockade of Boston Harbor. The Crown also restructures the Massachusetts government, restricts town hall meetings, which causes the boycott of British goods, and then also, which this does is forces the convening of the um, the uh, the Constitutional Congress in 1774. Okay, um, Georgia didn't go, but in uh, what we end up having in 1775 is the Prohibitory Act declares Britain's intention to coerce Americans into submission, impose embargo on American goods, and seize its ships. Movement. This causes the Second Continental Congress in 1776, where on July 4th, 1776, you have the Second Continental Congress announcing its Declaration of Independence, and this is why we celebrate July 4th. Now, when they did this, this becomes a declaration of war against the British, right? And this also increases that familiarity of classical liberal and classical Republican theories, where the classical liberal theory, which if you go back to chapter 1, it talks about this concept of individual rights and freedoms, right? Classical Republican theory is this idea of 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 having government uh, being being represented by another a person in government. So if you go back to the early America in the first election, which was not George Washington's first term. George Washington the first time was selected. It was the second term. When they had their elections, you had to be there's three components, three elements to this. You had to be white, male, landowner. Now, if you there was a lot of white people, but that end up excluding what? Black people, Indians. So right there, black people and Indians could not be a part of participate. So this is where the inegalitarianism comes in, which is basically this concept of excluding groups of people based on their race, gender, sexual orientation. This also excludes women, regardless of what color they are, due to coverture. Coverture, again, what we've learned in chapter 1 was when women married men, they lost all they lost their identity. But women lost their identity anyway, even if they didn't marry, because they lost it to their fathers or their brothers. Women didn't have an identity outside the men in their family. So again, if you go back, if you were a white male, okay, white male, right? There you go. That third element was owning property. Not everybody owned property. So that even excluded a lot of white people. So early America was a very class based society. So when we tell the story of America, I think we tend to romanticize a lot of it, and so we look at it as, oh, it's for people came here with nothing, and that's true. People did. Certain people came here with nothing and became wealthy, but America was also that other side of America where certain groups were not part of the American culture. Later on, we'll talk about the Exclusionary Acts, which excluded Asian Americans, especially Chinese, and how the Reconstruction Amendments, which are the Reconstruction Amendments, are the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and these are after the Civil War, how they excluded Asian Americans, how they were deemed not U.S. citizens, they had no rights, Asian Americans. So we'll get to that later on. So I want you to know, if you want to know more, it is to be continued, and the to be continued will be in your second chapter, Beyond the Road to Revolution, as they go into building this nation, building the Constitution, where they talk about the compromises, the Connecticut Compromise, because they had a Virginia plan, New Jersey plan, why we end up with a bicameral Congress, and all of that. So I know I said in 10 minutes, a little bit more like 15, but I want to thank you. Be mindful of your time, my scholars. It's important that you get your work done. But I would like to say have a great week. I look forward to, well, at least not necessarily seeing you, but I'll pop in again next week with the lecture. Please make sure you do your assignments for the week. Make sure you read your chapter, because when the midterm will be on your chapters that we have gone over. Have a great week. Thank you, and goodbye. Take care.